Yes, hello, my name is David Harley. So I come by way of Madrid. I'm doing an MBA over in Spain. Before that, I worked for 12 years in Canada in the building systems industry as a mechanical engineer. And before that, I lived in Ghana. So I spent the first 18 years of my life living in Ghana, West Africa. Um, a few years ago, I think Bill Gates has said Africa is on the rise. I think that was in 2012 or something like that. And the reason he said that is because the demographics support it. Africa has one of the youngest populations in the world, as opposed to the West, where the population is aging. I think probably about 6 years before that, the economist said a similar thing. So that's about 10 years ago. And that was the time when I just sort of moved over to Canada. And this was supposed to happen. You're supposed to see growing economies in a very short space of time. We haven't seen that. I think at least part of the reason we haven't seen that is sort of the nature of investment. A lot of investment has gone towards infrastructure, which is a good thing. But traditionally, the economic drivers in economies are the middle class. We've seen this startup trend happen in the East and in the West, sort of in Asia, China, Japan, and out here in the West. But it hasn't been mirrored in Africa. And part of the reason for that, big part of the reason for that is investment. Is there's still a high risk perception of African investment, and particularly African investment specific to individuals that want to start something. So that's one half of the problem. The other half of the problem is education, startup specific education. There are people that have got business training, but we don't really have a startup infrastructure in place similar to what you'd see in sort of the Silicon Valleys of the world or in Sweden, where you've got incubators happening or accelerators happening. Where it has happened, places like Nigeria, it's been tech specific. Now, tech's good and tech is scalable, but tech is sort of limited in terms of its ability to employ people. It depends on the tech startup that you're talking about. So what Think Startup is aiming to do is basically start to join in creating the startup infrastructure. It's developing. We think it needs to broaden. So we want to do three things. We want to advise via a website, thinkstartup.org, basically to have a board of advisors, people with startup experience, business professionals who will lend your time pro bono to train people, well, to not train, to provide advice virtually to entrepreneurs across Africa. And then we want to have workshops in sort of main African capitals: Accra, Ghana; Nairobi, Kenya; Lagos, Nigeria; Kampala, Uganda. We want to start here because we think we've got to show success early, and to do that, we've got to really target the entrepreneurs that we're going after. So we want to partner with business schools. So we're partnering with people that already have business training and help them to adapt that towards the startup environment. Third thing we want to do is we want to connect. We want to build partnerships and relationships with investors within Africa, because it seems, again, owing to this risk perception, there isn't too much investment coming in from the West. A lot of investment is actually within Africa. So we need to sort of leverage these relationships and start to connect these entrepreneurs who've now been trained to the point where they can understand how to monetize and scale their businesses with investment opportunities that fit their model, that fit their business. I think given that the startup ecosystem is so infantile, there's a real opportunity here to also be thought leaders in terms of, business is one thing, but business can be good and business can be bad. Can we actually contribute to the conversation towards developing business leaders that are thinking in the long term, that are thinking ecologically and not just economically, that are thinking sustainable? And I think Think Startup has the potential to really contribute to this discussion. In a nutshell, there's potential. There are people. There's all kinds of potential to be involved, but we really need to roll up our sleeves and get to it. I don't know how else to say it. There's a lot of work ahead of us. I think time frame, probably 2 to 3 years, we hope to have gained strong traction in the cities that we've talked about. South Africa is another potential, but they've got a stronger startup ecosystem than a lot of these other countries. So actually a lot of investment comes from South Africa. Their economy's done maybe 2% over the last few years. So we hope to really look there for our investment partners. Yeah, Thanks very much for your time.
Okay. So we're coming to the questions. Any questions from the jury? Yeah, Asiene.
Thank you. Not all ideas are born equal, I agree. Now, did you already have a very specific example of a meeting that you already had with investors, or how are you going to find your partners in Africa? And if you have any specific country already and you have been working.
So I'm from Ghana, so those are where my partnerships are starting from. I've got connections that are starting to build a investment fund with South African investors. The trick is the model has to look different. You can't just probably wouldn't work to sell investors on the idea of doing a multiple of 5 in 5 years, because we're in a place where these businesses are going to take longer to develop. So yes, these conversations with investors have started. We're yet to build a fund, but they have begun. On the other side, I've got connections in South Africa that run a platform that links startups with investors. So we've basically said, listen, here's what we're doing. Once we've got these startups to the point where they're investor ready, we'd like to use your platform to reach these investors in South Africa. So I would say Ghana and South Africa so far in terms of the investment community. And I think you asked the second half of your question, specific investors. Not that I personally know, more through the connections that I have. My idea is I want to attack this from the training aspect and then partner with them to put these startups in front of these investors.
Just one question is that in most of these contexts, I mean, I come from India, I've been back and seen the kind of startup environment. I've seen what's happening in America, in China as well. And it seems that the government plays a huge role in actually creating the environment, in actually sort of, getting these funds out and even perhaps sort of supporting the infrastructure to develop. Just, trying to understand why Ghana is not there. Because I've seen so much good stuff happen in Nairobi, etc. But is there something that you're doing with the government?
So far, not. So far, the government hasn't put much into this in terms of creating incentives or things like that. We will talk to them, but we want to get to a point where we have sort of a basic model of what we're trying to do that's running, and then we want to talk to them about possibly running programs with them. Having said that, my experience with working with the government is it can slow things down. Depends what country you're in. In my country, it can be an impediment as much as it can be a help. So I really wanna build partnerships directly with these universities and these business schools. I think that's the fastest way to go.
No, what you're doing is fantastic, and enabling the proliferation of startups, I think, is key for strengthening an economy and clearly in Africa to do it in a sustainable way. But I'm wondering how you're dealing with competition, because a lot of incubators, maybe not in Ghana, but I know in Kenya and South Africa, there are a lot of organizations that are incubating and accelerating businesses. How are you going to differentiate yourself from this competition, or is it not a competition? I don't know how to.
I think that it's a bit of both. The first thing is a lot of these incubators are tech focused because tech is the most scalable industry out there. On the other side, we provide more than just incubators. We provide, because of the virtual aspect of this, we aim to provide sort of, year-round advice and training. So after we run a workshop for a week or however long, we won't just leave you to work on your idea. You can reach out to us, organize Skype calls, whatever you need. The other side of it is I view these as potential partnerships. If South Africa, for instance, has boot camps that it runs and their ecosystem is a bit more built up, so why not partner with them and say, listen, can you help us get the word out there that after you run your boot camp, we can actually then come in and help these entrepreneurs continue to develop their ideas.
Maybe over here. So yeah, interesting. My question would be, you're saying you're mainly targeting business schools. What's the rationale for that? In a sense that, do you feel that the need is actually in implementation? So, you know, training business people that are already there, or do you think it might be interesting to actually look at other target populations, such as, you know, people on the street essentially having just great ideas and trying to enable them rather than people in business schools?
I think targeting business schools is sort of a go-to-market strategy. It's we need to gain critical mass, and it's the easiest way to get that, as opposed to going to people individually or you know, from marketing perspective, it's much easier to go to one place and say, here are people that are 80% of the way there. It also sort of is the most efficient way to develop traction and develop success as early as possible, because to bring these investors in, we need to show success pretty early. So I think it's kind of the tip of the sword. That's how we want to enter the market. But beyond that, you know, we definitely look to involve people of all walks of life.
Because I'm just wondering if these are the most entrepreneurial-minded ones, but
Not always, but in terms of being trained, the gap is smaller.
Thank you. Just one question about what's your revenue model? How are you going to generate revenue?
So at the moment, let's call it an impact project. The reason being, for me to recruit advisors, I don't think I can give them a dual motivation of you can make some money while you help people. I've talked to people that have run this model in Spain and other countries, and they've said you really need to be clear about the motivation when you bring mentors on, because if you give them a dual motivation, very often it happens that they will spend your time helping those startups that show more or that are closer to being you know, Series A or monetized. And what we really want to do is say everyone's welcome. We don't want to show preference. So to start with, it's certainly sort of not-for-profit / impact project. In terms of sustaining the program, because it's virtual, the costs aren't high. The workshops we'll probably have to charge something for, but the aim is to break even, just enough money to fly in our trainers, and pretty much run it.
Thank you.
Okay, I think if there's no other very urgent question, I would like to thank you again for your presentation.
Thank you very much.